Good Yantif. Shai Agnon, the only Israeli to win the Nobel in Literature, has a short story called Pi Shnayim, Twofold. The story takes place in Jerusalem on Kol Nidre, tonight. The story is 17 short vignettes as the first-person narrator goes from one Yom Kippur to the next. As I mentioned at the start of the service, Kol Nidre is the only night of the year that Jews typically wear a talit. So in the middle of Agnon's story, the narrator realizes that he accidentally came to the synagogue for Kol Nidre without his talis. Although there are extras for him to borrow, he decides to run home, preferring his personal one instead. At home, however, he remembers that he owns not one, but two talitot. The first, a gift from his recently deceased father-in-law, sent from the old country, and the second was new, made in Jerusalem, purchased by the narrator himself. The two talitot denote two parts of the narrator's identity. One represents centuries of family heritage and, more generally, the past, and the other is brand new. When Agnon wrote in the first half of the 20th century, the Jerusalem talit surely represented the unbounded possibility of a Jewish Renaissance in Israel. More generally, this second talit was all about the future. Perhaps you're the kind of person who prefers choices. But for the narrator, the two talitot spark an existential crisis. He can't seem to decide between the old talit representing the past or the new one representing the future. The narrator, it turns out, is the most indecisive person who ever lived. And Agnon milks the absurdity. The narrator literally freezes. It takes him hours and hours and hours to decide between the two talits because he's genuinely torn between fidelity to the past, commitment to the future. He takes so long to decide that all of Yom Kippur tragically passes him by. He missed the whole day because he couldn't choose which talit to bring to the synagogue. Agnon writes acerbically, "I waited in my mind like a pharmacist who slowly and deliberately measures out medicines for a patient and then is informed that the patient has already died." We too are caught in a bit of a space-time vortex as we arrive at this moment in our year. The prayer book itself seems uncertain about whether Kol Nidre is an occasion for us to think more about who we were in the year that's passed or more about the people we're on the verge of becoming in the year ahead. Tonight, we'll try to uncover the meaning behind the famous Kol Nidre prayer that Cantor Becker chanted earlier this evening to better understand the essence of this sacred day. Before we even get to the name and content of the prayer, keep in mind that the text is less than 60 words in the Hebrew, well short of the 80 or so that make up the traditionally sung portions of the Star-Spangled Banner. Even with its minuscule word count, the prayer takes up an unusually large space in Jewish spiritual consciousness. Just think about what we experienced earlier this evening. There was the tremendous pageantry of removing all the Torah scrolls for the recitation, and it's the only moment in our year when we call forward all of the synagogue's past presidents to help us jointly lead the congregation. And there's the fact that our tradition became so preoccupied with this short prayer that the name of the prayer became the name of this entire service on the evening of our holiest day of the year. Kol Nidre means all vows. As background, Judaism takes verbal vows and promises seriously. Of course, that's obvious when we think about the big, important promises we make to one another, like sacred promises made at a wedding, or the kind made between co-owners when a new business is started. But the vows we refer to on Kol Nidre also include the less formal ones, the promises we make to ourselves and others about genuinely wanting to go to the gym more frequently, or being more present with our kids, or, let's be honest, a desire to volunteer more at Scarsdale Synagogue in the year ahead. If we make those commitments out loud or in writing, Judaism demands that we take such promises seriously. In Deuteronomy 23:24, we read, "You must fulfill what has crossed your lips and perform what you have voluntarily vowed, having made the promise with your own mouth." For our ancient ancestors, the practical functioning of society depended on people honoring the promises they made to one another. There was also a spiritual component to the commitment. Bachia of early 12th century Spain wrote, "Just as humanity expects God to make good on what the Holy One promises, so the Holy One expects us to make good on the promises we make to each other." But of course, life happens. And so the rabbis agonize about creating a process for annulling such vows before a Jewish court if the situation warranted. And their work lives on today in the prayer we recite this evening called Kol Nidre. The text reads in part, "All vows, resolves, and commitments, vows of abstinence in terms of obligations, we regret them, and for all of them we repent. They are not valid, they are not binding. All shall be forgiven for failing to fulfill their promises, for all have gone astray in error." Where did this prayer come from? Scholar Baruch Levine wonders whether it originated in early medieval Jewish magic. European bowls have been discovered, inscribed with parts of the prayer, and Levine believes the words were recited as part of a magical spell to exorcise demons and evil spirits. There is actually a Jewish history of magic and the occult, and if you're interested in learning more about it, come and join me for the Saturday Salon gathering that I'll be facilitating on October 18th. But the most well-known theory is that the prayer was a response to the Spanish Inquisition and the rise of crypto-Jews in 15th and 16th century Spain and Portugal. These Jews were forced to convert to Catholicism. According to this theory, the prayer was composed as a legal loophole for them. Jews had to pledge a commitment to Christianity to save their lives, but Kol Nidre functioned as the fourth grade equivalent of crossing your fingers behind your back to indicate that you didn't mean the promise that you were making. Forgive us of our vows and don't hold us to them. We weren't trying to lie. We had no choice. That theory makes for a good story, but in actuality, we have documentary evidence of the prayer's existence in the prayer book dating all the way back to the 8th and 9th centuries. Those early versions are all written as backward-facing. It imagined Jewish worshipers asking God to forgive the promises they had made but not fulfilled in the year that was now ending. But that idea stirred trouble in neighboring non-Jewish communities. Non-Jews protested. What good is the promise of a Jew if a simple prayer magically relieves them of the obligation to fulfill that promise? Rabbi Tam, a significant legal scholar from 12th century France, shared those concerns. He changed the text to the future tense, assuming that would mitigate concerns about Jewish trustworthiness. To this day, the version recited in nearly all of the Jewish world, including ours, is Rabbeinu Tam's forward-looking one, On the eve of Yom Kippur, we beg God to annul the vows that we will make in the year ahead. But this revision didn't resolve the liturgy's theological concerns. As recently as the last century, non-Jews and Jews have continued to ask those very same questions. Outside of Judaism, consider the anti-Semitic voice of the Staatsbürger Zeitung, a prominent Berlin newspaper that published the following in 1910, 23 years before Hitler's rise to power. Kol Nidre is a culpable deception of the Aryans by the Jews. A Jew cannot commit perjury in court because of this prayer? He may brand truth a lie and ruin his fellow man. These moral dues of Judaism are a criminal assault on humanity and civilization. It might be easy to write off that critique because of its obvious anti-Semitism. But the same concerns were echoed by early 20th century non-Orthodox Jews who were genuinely unsure about whether to include the prayer in the prayer book. Earlier tonight, we experienced the time-honored tradition featuring the cello rendition of Kol Nidre. Why do so many Reform synagogues include an instrumental solo of Kol Nidre? Because the Union Prayer Book Reform Machzor, originally published in the early 1890s, objected to the prayer just like the Berlin newspaper did in 1910. The UPB deleted this most famous prayer from the prayer book. Its only note encouraged congregations to do an instrumental-only version to honor the hauntingly familiar melody of the prayer. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, grappled with the same questions in the mid-1940s. As he drafted his Reconstructionist Machzor, he was initially inclined to follow in the footsteps of the Union Prayer Book and delete the prayer altogether. Then he proposed substitute texts sung to the traditional melody, but there was a tremendous uproar from his followers. His own mother, Mrs. Kaplan, wrote to him, "You are destroying Judaism. Do you understand what you're doing to yourself? I will not tell you what you're doing to me and maybe also to your father in his grave. I am too weak now. I cannot write anymore. You be well and happy with your family. Signed, your mother." Needless to say, Kaplan restored the traditional text, ending the debate for now about whether it belongs in modern prayer books. I keep thinking about Agnon's narrator, confronted with the choice of which talit to bring to the synagogue, one representing his past, one his future, and how this prayer also functions as something for us to wrestle with. We too are torn between the attachment we have to its melody and memories, just like Mrs. Kaplan on the one hand, and also a skeptical detachment to the literal meaning of the text and modernity on the other, like her famous rabbi son Mordechai. There's also a man whose name was Leon Chalet. He was born in Poland in the spring of 1892, and he was a prisoner at Sachsenhausen concentration camp in 1939 and 1940. He writes about a moment in the barracks when it felt like he was the only person still alive. And I quote, "The oppressive silence of the night was broken by a mournful tune. It was the plaintive tones of the ancient Kol Nidre prayer. The prayer brought the ghostly group of seemingly insensible human beings back to life. Little by little, they all roused themselves. When at last the prayer leader was silent, there was an exultation among us, an exaltation which people experience when they have fallen as low as we had fallen, and then, through the mystic power of a deathless prayer, have awakened once more to the world of the Spirit. Chalet reminds us that this prayer is about so much more than the literal meaning of its words. Kol Nidre's power is in its ability to transcend a conversation about the forgiveness of sins, past or future. Instead, Kol Nidre is about linking us to the whole Jewish people, past, present, and future, in a ritual that has been a foundational part of Judaism for centuries. By linking ourselves to that long chain of tradition, we breathe new life into ourselves and our Judaism. Whatever brought you here tonight, whether it was your concern about the rise in anti-Semitism against the Jewish people, your concern about the state of things in Israel, or a hunger to connect to something beyond yourself, your presence on this sacred evening is an act of solidarity that creates holy community. As Rabbi Jeremy Schwartz puts it, part of the awesome power of Kol Nidre comes from the gathering of so many Jews in community. Although we may have hesitations regarding the prayer, these pale in comparison to the fulfillment of our one shared commitment to be here together. Like Agnon's narrator, we stand before two talitot, one imbued with memory and identity, the other with all the possibility of who we might be in the future. Kol Nidre isn't about choosing one over the other. It's about wrapping ourselves in the past and the future and affirming the vitality of the Jewish people in the process. In that spirit, we echo the prayerful poetry of our Machzor. The future has an ancient heart. The tree still stands. Your love, O God, endures. Long may it be so, and let us say together, Amen.